wait for people to kind of like raise their hand. If you have something to say, like, feel free to share. Feel free to like jump in. This is a safe space. This is a place where you can share your thoughts, your questions, ideas, whatever it may be. Just, don't interrupt or talk over other people. Just normal conversation, niceties. But you don't have to like sit here, like raise your hand and be like, I'm waiting to be called on. I'm not going to call on you. I'll just like say, go ahead. So just kind of like ground rules for that. But we're starting a new quarterly, and this one's all about rest. So I kind of want to like set the tone, kind of like a baseline, kind of where we are. Like, what does rest mean to you? Like when you think of the word rest, whether you do word association, story to tell, whatever, what does rest mean to you? Yeah.
Hello? Oh, there we go. Rest means for me, like, at peace by myself. Just away from the hustle and bustle of the world.
Okay. So at peace by yourself. You wore the wrong shoes for that today.
I guess for me, it's maybe summer break after school's done. Summer break. Being a teacher, you eventually get rest, right? Not being bothered by what brings you stress, I guess.
Okay, so no stress, not being bothered, we're going away from people. Resting for me is like to pause, to kind of pause as well and change routine, if that makes sense. I know you guys have a mic over there. Are you hopping in? Yeah. And you're cool with interrupting me. I'll interrupt myself.
Yeah, for me, Brittany kind of said it along the lines. For me, it's really just being at peace.
Okay.
I guess to paint an imagery, I think of just the state that you feel whenever you're sitting by the beach, and it's just like, listening to the waves and watching the ocean tide, and it's just kind of like that state of feeling of being at peace and being calm.
Okay. So a state of being, which is really interesting that you pull in the state of being. It's not just like an actual action. It's also kind of existential thing. So I want to ask this, though. We live in American culture and society. Do you think that we know how to rest?
No.
Do you think other cultures know how to rest?
Yes.
Okay, do you have like examples of like what rest looks like?
I studied abroad in Argentina,
Okay.
and I realized that I didn't know what rest was until then. Like, they have designated rest periods during the day. They like spend time with their families. It's not just work, 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 work. What do I have to do at home? They have designated times to just like, let's drink mate, let's relax. Like I would be walking down the street and I'd run into someone I hadn't seen in weeks, and they would just be like, okay, well, let's just stop, sit down on the sidewalk with our feet in the street, wanting to get run over. And then we would just sit, talk, rest, relax, and like it didn't matter like the go, 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 where do I have to be every 5 seconds of the day that we do here. And it just kind of revamped my view of rest. Like, resting can be just taking time to slow down.
So I think in our society, especially in the realm of maybe social work, there is the trend of self-care. And I think that you can actually be actively doing something and still be at rest. If I am, let's say, people have different means. For me, it's writing. So if I'm journaling, if I'm writing, I see that as a moment of rest because I am intentionally focusing on a task that allows my brain to kind of to share my thoughts and be able to kind of what's the term, unload any type of worries through that act. So it doesn't necessarily mean just seizing everything, but rather engaging in an activity that actually allows you to be, like he said, in a state of mind or a state of being that is actually refreshing, de-stressing, and we'll probably get to this later on, but in a state of being where you are prepared to be in the presence of God.
Is it possible? I know being Seventh-day Adventists, one of our biggest, fundamental beliefs is that Saturday is seventh day, right? We rest on Sabbath. And you can get a whole bunch of do's and don'ts on what you can and cannot do on Sabbath. And that's just that's not even Ruben, you always say it's not an issue of salvation. Thank you. Issue of salvation. The whole point of rest on Sabbath, though, is biblically based. And it's from the beginning. Rest and the seventh-day Sabbath wasn't something that God created for the Israelites. It wasn't something that God gave them as a gift in the tabernacle. It wasn't something God, like when Jesus came down and gave to his disciples as a day of rest. Rest existed from the beginning of time, from the beginning of when our world was created here. Rest was incorporated into our daily lives. And I was thinking about that. I'm like, what was the purpose of rest? Like, what was the initial idea of rest for us? Because when God created the world was perfect, right? At the beginning, it was as he created it to be. And yet, there was still a time set aside for rest. And I'm like, well, was life really that stressful in the Garden of Eden? Like, I think that farming is stressful. Geez, I think sitting outside is stressful. I don't like nature. I'm not a naturey person. Like, my version of rest is like burying myself under blankets with like snacks and watching Netflix. Like, that's my version of rest. And I think that sometimes we try to define what rest should look like for other people. As Ruben was saying, though, with self-care, that's a big buzzword right now, making sure you're doing self-care, make sure you're taking care of yourself, making sure you're pouring back into yourself. Because we live in a society of a rat race of like, you have to be first to do everything. Like currently Jeff Bezos and Virgin Atlantic guy are in a race to be the first guy in space, okay? Like they're racing right now to be first and gonna launch one of them. And it's just this constant need to do something first, to be the best, to be more. And like at some point, more is just more. Like what do you do with more stuff, right? What do you do with more money? What do you do with more cars? What do you do with more houses? Like what do you do with that? Because that's kind of like the culture we live in now is like, oh, you have to have this many followers and you have to have this many likes and you have to have, this many things in order to be considered successful. But like, what if you had more time? Because I think one of the biggest things we feel like we don't have is time. Y'all know me. I run 20 minutes late to everything. I was 2 weeks late to my own birth. So it's like, and it's a true story. I was 2 weeks late. And I always want more time. And then you have to really sit down and think of like, well, what are you putting your time into? I'm the girl that's like, oh, let's start cleaning right now when we have to leave in like 30 minutes because I can do these 7 tasks in 30 minutes, right? Or I'm the girl that's like, oh, I have this deadline that I have to meet, but let me just go ahead and like go chase some wasps in my yard. Like that's what I did for 3.5 hours. Instead of meeting a goal on Wednesday, I was outside taking down wasp nests for 3.5 hours because that's the self-defeating behavior that I have. Yes? You have one job.
Just go ahead, though.
Just go ahead. You're good.
I just remember something a long time ago that I was talking to somebody about, and we're talking about that same issue of time. And when it comes to like having devotional time and things like that. And it just brought up the fact that, or the understanding that it's not necessarily the fact that maybe we need more time, but just the fact of how we prioritize. Because if you think about it, if we had, let's say all of a sudden tomorrow, we all of a sudden had 4 extra hours in the day. Think about that, like a 28-hour day. We would eventually fill up that space with other things as well. And then we still be like, oh, I need more time. Then we have 32 hours. Oh, I need more time during the day. Like it'll be a never-ending, like, you'll still feel like you need more time, but it's just a matter of prioritizing and setting time aside. And when I think of that of Adam and Eve and in the beginning, how God set that time aside, I kind of think of it as you would set time aside for a spouse. You may not have the most stressful week or whatever. You may not be like so busy that you can't even shoot your spouse a text or anything like that. But wouldn't it still be nice to set out one day a week to do something with your spouse, to spend quality time? And when I think of how God instituted a day of rest for us since creation for Adam and Eve, and how Adam and Eve spent time with God, I kind of think of it in that way, in that sense, spending quality time with God.
Okay. So it's about intentionality. It's kind of like the root of what I'm hearing you say. It's like there's an intentionality with it. Like even if you had more time, like are you doing it with intention? And so like looking at the beginning of rest for us in the Bible, Genesis 2, okay? Genesis 2 verses 1 to 4, all right? Now, God has come and he's created the world. He's separated the light from the darkness. He's made the plants. He's made the trees. He's made the fish. He's made the animals. He's made man and woman at this point. And this is coming to the end of the week. So it says, so the creation of the heavens and earth and everything in them was complete. And on the seventh day, having finished his task, God rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy because it was the day he rested from his work of creation. This is the account of the creation of the heavens and the earth. Now, looking into terminology here, there are two versions of rest in the Hebrew language that's used, okay? There's Shabbat, which is translated into Sabbath, okay? A physical setting aside of a physical day of rest. And there's also this other word that I cannot pronounce, nuach, which nuach means to rest them, to settle them, to be. It's kind of this all-encompassing existential verbiage of rest. It means to be something. How do you be rest? And what does that have to do with the intentionality of Shabbat? Because the context of what's being said is he rested on this seventh day. So he ceased his work. He stopped. But he also came to be with his creation. Like, what does that mean? Like, what is the Bible trying to tell us from the beginning, before we even had 28, excuse me, I'm making up fundamental beliefs now, 28 fundamental beliefs, right? Before we had denominations, before we had division, before we had a need for a tabernacle. Before we had, the sanctuary was already in existence, right? The sanctuary was already in heaven. And then God gave us an example here for us to follow, okay? And as time goes on, he gives people a little bit more and more and more structure because people needed a little bit more and more and more structure because they don't listen. But what does it mean to be in the beginning? And can we even grasp that concept? How do you just be with somebody? Because like date nights for me are, yeah, great. We're watching something on Netflix and we're both on our phones at the same time. But we're not working, right? We're sitting there and we're not on our phones, but we're together. Is that to be? Is it intentionality of like, I'm going to pause on whatever I'm doing right here, but I'm mentally not present for you either? Because I've got that mental list going at all points in time of what I'm supposed to be doing or what I should have done. How many of you guys count down the minutes until sundown on Fridays? I got 28 minutes to finish cleaning my house. 28 minutes until actuals, like, are we doing actual sunrise? Are we doing actual sunset? Is it the moonrise? Yes, Natalia. You do that? You count down the minutes. You're like watching that clock. I know to the minute every week. Hey, Google, sunset, Hickson. Tell me, how much time I got, right? And then how many of us are counting down the minutes on Saturday?
Depends on the day.
Right? We're counting down the minutes. I mean, it's like when someone comes to visit your house and you're like, it's so nice to have you here. When are you leaving? Right? Yes, Ruben.
So I think in trying to answer that question, what it means to be in terms of with someone, I think we get a glimpse of how to define that right at the moment where Adam and Eve are united. Because he says to them, you know, and from this moment forth, a man shall leave a father and mother and be with his wife, and they should become one flesh, right? So to become or to be one flesh requires a union between two different things. And when you look at that example, it's derived from the Trinity itself, in which you have three different beings united in purpose and just about everything else, but three different distinct individual beings. So there's a sense of, can you be and keep your individuality, but at the same time be in unison with somebody else? So I think there's a delicate balance there in which, yes, you can be in terms of be one or an individual, but you can also become one flesh or become one with somebody else. But that's going to require a unison, a singular purpose that you both share.
I think in relation to this whole rest thing and to be, I mean, the whole point of God resting, it wasn't because he was tired, it was because like he's satisfied with everything that he's done. He's resting from his work to be, like you said, with his creation. And I think that's the whole point of Sabbath rest for us, is to be with God. Not to rest because we've had a stressful week, but if we're resting, like you said, you're being with your husband, but you guys are doing your own thing. Like our rest on Sabbath is to be with God, not to just like, oh, I'm so tired, God wants me to rest.